So this time we have a grouped frequency table. Now, by grouped frequency, I mean that there's time intervals. So you'll see uses of inequalities. So this means that one pupil finished in a time between 0 and 3 minutes. It took them that time to complete their puzzle. 2 pupils took between 3 and 6 minutes. 5 pupils between 6 and 9. 3 between 9 and 12 minutes. 5 pupils between 12 and 15 minutes. And 4 pupils between 15 and 18 minutes. So they can't ask you for the exact range because we don't know whether this one pupil here took them 1 minute or it took them 3 minutes. We just don't know. Okay, could have took them 0 minutes for all we know. And the same goes for the other end. It could have took these 4 people. It could have took all of them 15 minutes. It could have took one of them 18 minutes. We just don't know. So the biggest possible range would be therefore what's the widest gap. So 18 minutes and 0 minutes. So 18 take away 0 is 18. So that's if someone took 0 minutes. So maybe it was rounded down. They took 30 seconds, for example. And the longest person took 18 minutes. So that's just an assumption. The smallest, well, that would be if someone took 15 minutes, so the lower end of that top inequality. And the bigger end of the smaller inequality, so 15 take away 3, which is 12. So they're 2 possible ranges, but actually we don't know the exact range. So we're going to find the modal time interval. So again, modal means the most common. So at the moment it's a bit confusing because we've got intervals instead of 1 unit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the midway point of each of the intervals. And to find the midway point nice and easily, I add the 2 either ends. So 0 add 3 is 3, divide by 2. And I get 1.5. So I'm just going to add the midpoints onto each of these lines now. Okay, so I've got my midpoints. Now, when I'm doing this on paper, I normally put them just above here, if I'm perfectly honest, but I'll put them here so that you can clearly see. So the midpoint of this interval is here, midpoint here, midpoint of this is here, and so on. Okay, so now let's think, well, so if I was taking the midpoints quite literally, how many 1.5s, how many pupils took 1.5 minutes? Well, there was only 1 pupil. So let's put that here. So we've got 1.5. How many pupils took 4.5 minutes? Well, that's 2. So I need to draw 2 of that. So 4.5. Change it to that blue. 4.5. And it was twice. So I'm just going to carry on doing my listing now. Okay, so I've got my list completed. So there was 1 person who scored 1.5, 2 people scored 4.5, 5 people took 7.5 minutes, 3 people took 10.5 minutes, 5 people took 13.5 minutes, and then 4 people took 16.5 minutes. So I've got my list sorted. So the modal is the most common. So what's the most common time? So the most common time is going to be the one that's got the most number of pupils. So let's have a look, and that's going to be, it's going to be a combination between this interval here, so 6 to 9, and also this interval here, which also has 5 people. So it's a double mode. So my answer, and remember it's the interval that I'm after. I'm not after the number, I'm not after 5, okay? You can see that that's clearly the highest number of pupils in a group, but the mode interval is actually 6 to 9. So it's 6 to 9 and also 12 to 15. There's 2 modal intervals here. So we've got the same set of data here. I've still found my midpoints of each of the intervals, and I've still got my lists at the ends just to show you exactly why this works. So in what time interval would the median be? So the median is going to be the middle value once you put everything in order. So if I take all of these values now and if I put them around here, and then I can start doing my crossing off. Remember, change your diagonal line for each pair. And it leaves us 10.5. So I'm looking at the interval 10.5, which is actually this interval here. So it's between 9 and 12. So I know that's my answer. 9 and 12. Now let's look at what we could have done instead of writing that list out. So if you think back to the video when we just looked at frequency tables, what we did was we found out how many there were in total in the list. So there was 20, it shows you in the question. 20 in the list. We add 1 and we divide by 2. So 20 add 1 is 21. Divided by 2 is 10.5. Now this just happens to be, complete coincidence, the same number as this, but remember this is actually looking for the 10.5th number. Where would the 10.5th number be? Okay, it's just complete coincidence that the answer is actually 10.5. So to find where the 10.5th pupil would be, I need to find the cumulative frequency. So cumulative frequency. So at this point, I've only got one pupil. At this point, I've got 1, add the 2, which is 3. Then 1, add 2, add 5 is 8. Add 3 is 11. Add that 5 is 16. Add that 4 is 20. So I'm looking for where the 10.5th pupil would be. So there's 1 pupils, 3, 8. So to this point, there's only been 8 pupils. Up to this point, there's been 11. So the 10.5th would have come before the 11th. So it's going to be in this category, which is the one I got earlier. So between 9 and 12 minutes. Okay, so finally we're going to look for the mean on this same set of data. So the important point to remember that so far we have found the midpoints of each of these intervals. So we've looked at the midpoints. Now it's actually really important to know that this isn't actually the mean, this is the estimated mean. And it's estimated purely because we have taken the midpoints to be the truth, when actually it couldn't be, it might not be. It could have taken this pupil only 30 seconds rather than 1.5 minutes. It could have taken these 3 pupils here, it could have took them all 12 minutes rather than 10.5 minutes. So actually it's just an estimate. So it's estimated mean. Okay, so if I was finding the mean normally, just from this set of data, what I would be doing would be adding them all together and and dividing by how many there are. Let's just put them all in a row for a second. And if you go back to the other video that we did when it was just not grouped frequency tables, just frequency tables, you might remember that I spent a long time putting every single thing and adding every single thing onto my calculator when there was a much quicker way. And the quicker way was just by timesing your frequency by your variable. And here's as is time, and we've got the midpoint, so that's what we're going to be timesing by. So instead of putting, 1.5 would be fine because 1.5 times 1 is 1.5. But instead of putting 4.5 add 4.5 on my calculator, I'm going to times 4.5 by 2. And instead of putting 7.5 add 7.5 add 7.5 blah 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 blah, I can just put 7.5 times 5 because there's 5 lots of 7.5, there's 3 lots of 10.5, there's 5 lots of 13.5, and there's 4 lots of 16.5. So now I can figure out each of those. So I've got 4.5 times 2, which is 9, 7.5 times 5, which is 37.5, 10.5 times 3, 31.5, 13.5 times 5, that's 67.5, and 16.5 times 4, which is 66. So remember, we need to add all of those numbers together. So 1.5, add 9, add 37.5, add 31.5, add 67.5, add 66, and I get 213. So when I add all this list together, I get 213 and divide by how many there are, which was the total frequency, which was actually given in the question. It was 20. So 213 divided by 20, and I get 10.65. I'm going to round that. So it's a whole minute, so I'm going to round it to 11 minutes. Is my mean time to complete the puzzle. Estimated mean time to complete the puzzle.